Gemini doesn't hate easily. That's the first thing most people get wrong. They are curious, adaptable, mentally open, and surprisingly tolerant of human flaws. They try to understand before they judge. They listen longer than they should. They give chances that most signs wouldn't. So when a Gemini finally reaches the point of hate, it's never impulsive, it's never loud, and it's never temporary. It's the result of quiet observation, mental accumulation, and a line being crossed one too many times. If you're a Gemini watching this, you may already feel it in your chest. That cold shift, that moment when something inside you clicks and you realize, I'm done. And if you're not a Gemini, this video might explain why someone you once felt close to suddenly went distant, detached, or completely unreachable. Before we go deeper, take a moment to support the channel. If this resonates with you already, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and activate notifications. It helps this content reach more people who need to hear it, and it lets you stay connected to future videos like this one. Now let's talk about the truth most people don't want to face. Gemini doesn't hate because of one mistake. They hate because of patterns, because of repetition, because of disrespect disguised as jokes, emotional manipulation disguised as honesty, and crossed boundaries disguised as concern. Gemini sees through all of it, and they remember everything. The first thing that can make a Gemini hate you forever is treating their intelligence as something optional, talking down to them, assuming they don't notice what's happening, thinking you can lie, twist facts, or change stories without being caught. Gemini's mind is always running, always connecting dots, always replaying conversations. When you insult their intelligence, even subtly, something breaks, not emotionally, but mentally. And once a Gemini stops respecting your mind, the emotional bond begins to rot. Gemini may not confront you immediately. In fact, they often won't. They'll ask questions instead. They'll observe your responses. They'll watch how your words change depending on who's listening. They'll test consistency. And the moment they confirm that you think they're naive or easy to fool, the seed of hate is planted. From that point on, every interaction is filtered through disappointment. Another powerful trigger is emotional manipulation. Gemini values freedom, especially mental freedom. When someone tries to guilt them, pressure them, or emotionally corner them into behaving a certain way, it creates internal resistance. Gemini doesn't respond well to control disguised as love. They can sense when emotions are being used as tools rather than expressions. What makes this especially dangerous is that Gemini will often play along at first, not because they accept it, but because they're studying it. They want to understand the motive behind the behavior. But once they realize that someone consistently uses emotion to control outcomes, the connection begins to die. And when Gemini emotionally disconnects, hate can quietly take its place. Another irreversible mistake is dismissing Gemini's feelings while demanding access to their thoughts. People often misunderstand Gemini's emotional world because it's not always expressive. Gemini processes emotions intellectually first. They analyze before they feel. When someone invalidates that process, calling them cold, detached, or uncaring, it creates resentment. Especially when that same person expects Gemini to be emotionally available on demand. Gemini notices imbalance immediately. If they feel expected to explain themselves endlessly while their own feelings are brushed aside, something hardens inside them. Over time, that frustration transforms into aversion. Not explosive anger, but a deep internal rejection of the person who made them feel unseen. One of the most underestimated ways to trigger Gemini's hatred is betrayal of confidence. Gemini may seem open, communicative, and light-hearted, but when they trust someone with personal thoughts, fears, or vulnerabilities, it means something. When that trust is violated, especially through gossip or exposure, the emotional damage is permanent. Gemini doesn't just feel betrayed, they feel intellectually insulted for ever trusting that person. And that self-directed disappointment often gets redirected outward as hate. From that point on, the Gemini mind rewrites the entire relationship, reclassifying the person as unsafe, unworthy, and emotionally irrelevant. What's important to understand is that Gemini rarely seeks revenge. Hate, for Gemini, isn't about punishment. It's about erasure, emotional deletion. Once someone reaches that category, Gemini doesn't argue, explain, or seek closure. They simply withdraw their presence, their thoughts, and their energy. There's also a specific type of behavior that Gemini finds unforgivable: inconsistency paired with entitlement. Saying one thing and doing another, making promises and forgetting them, expecting loyalty without offering honesty. Gemini tracks patterns over time. They don't need dramatic betrayals to walk away. They need repeated contradictions. When someone demands access to Gemini's time, attention, or emotional labor while offering chaos in return, the Gemini mind eventually concludes that the exchange isn't worth it. And once that conclusion is reached, the emotional door closes quietly but permanently. Gemini's hate is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up as silence, as distance, as indifference so complete it feels unsettling to those on the outside. People often mistake it for maturity or emotional neutrality. But beneath it lies a firm internal decision. You no longer exist in my inner world. If you're a Gemini listening to this, you may recognize moments where you tried to explain, to clarify, to fix misunderstandings, only to realize you were the only one making an effort. That realization is often the turning point. The moment when love turns into detachment, and detachment slowly hardens into something colder. And if you're someone who has lost a Gemini and never understood why, the answer is likely hidden in moments you thought didn't matter. The jokes that crossed lines, the lies that seemed harmless, the emotional pressure you justified. Gemini remembers all of it. We're only halfway through this conversation. There are deeper layers to why Gemini reaches this point, and even more subtle behaviors that guarantee permanent emotional exile from their life. There is a moment in every Gemini's life when they stop asking questions, and when that happens, something irreversible has already taken place. Gemini is known for curiosity, dialogue, and mental flexibility. So when silence replaces questions, it is never accidental. It is the final stage of emotional and intellectual withdrawal. One of the most dangerous mistakes people make with Gemini is assuming that silence means peace. It does not. Gemini's silence is rarely emptiness. It is evaluation. It is the mind replaying conversations, reanalyzing intentions, and quietly drawing conclusions. When someone repeatedly ignores Gemini's need for honest communication, minimizes their concerns, or avoids accountability, that silence slowly fills with resentment. Gemini does not hate chaos. They hate unresolved chaos. They can tolerate complexity, contradictions, and emotional layers as long as there is openness. What they cannot tolerate is emotional fog created to avoid responsibility. When someone refuses to clarify intentions, dodges uncomfortable conversations, or gaslights Gemini into questioning their own perceptions, hatred begins to take shape. Gaslighting is especially toxic to Gemini. Their mind relies on logic, memory, and pattern recognition. When someone repeatedly denies things they clearly said or did, Gemini feels mentally violated. It's not just emotional pain, it's an attack on their cognitive integrity. And once Gemini feels that their reality is being intentionally distorted, the emotional connection collapses completely. Another powerful trigger is disrespecting Gemini's boundaries after they have clearly been stated. Gemini does not enjoy setting boundaries. They prefer flexibility. So when they finally express a limit, it means they've already endured too much. Ignoring that boundary, pushing past it, or mocking it is interpreted as a declaration of war. At that point, Gemini doesn't argue. They don't explain again. They internalize a simple conclusion: this person does not respect me. And for Gemini, respect is the foundation of any connection. Without it, love has nowhere to stand. From there, emotional withdrawal becomes automatic. There is also something deeply offensive to Gemini about being underestimated emotionally. Many people assume Gemini is emotionally detached because they process feelings intellectually. But this assumption often leads others to be careless with their emotions around Gemini, saying hurtful things and excusing them as logic, being emotionally cruel and calling it honesty. Gemini sees through that instantly. They understand the difference between truth and brutality. When someone consistently hides emotional insensitivity behind bluntness, Gemini begins to associate that person with emotional danger. And once that association is formed, the emotional bond is contaminated beyond repair. Another behavior that pushes Gemini toward hate is forcing emotional urgency, demanding immediate reactions, pressuring them to feel, respond, or commit faster than their mind is ready to process. Gemini needs mental clarity before emotional decisions. When someone rushes that process, it creates anxiety and resistance. Over time, that resistance turns into aversion. Gemini begins to feel emotionally suffocated, mentally cornered, and internally restless around that person. And when Gemini associates someone with the loss of mental freedom, they instinctively reject them. One of the most painful realizations for Gemini is recognizing hypocrisy, especially moral hypocrisy. Gemini values consistency between words and actions. When someone preaches values they don't live by, criticizes behaviors they themselves exhibit, or holds Gemini to standards they refuse to meet, it creates deep contempt. Gemini may tolerate this for a while, especially if there's emotional history involved, but internally respect is eroding. And once respect is gone, Gemini's emotional attachment follows shortly after. Hate doesn't arrive dramatically, it arrives quietly, disguised as indifference. There is also the issue of emotional exploitation. Some people are drawn to Gemini because of their intelligence, insight, and conversational depth. They lean on Gemini for advice, validation, and mental stimulation, but disappear when Gemini needs the same in return. This imbalance does not go unnoticed. Gemini keeps mental records. They remember who listened and who only talked, who supported and who only took. When that imbalance becomes a pattern, Gemini doesn't confront it emotionally. They correct it behaviorally by withdrawing access. And when access is removed, hate often replaces affection, not because Gemini is cruel, but because they feel used. And nothing repels Gemini more than feeling like a resource instead of a human being. Another unforgivable trigger is emotional dishonesty. Not lies about facts, but lies about intentions. Pretending to care, pretending to be present, pretending to commit while emotionally staying half available. Gemini senses emotional incongruence immediately. When words and energy don't align, they feel unsettled. If this pattern continues, Gemini begins to emotionally disengage long before the other person realizes something is wrong. By the time the truth surfaces, Gemini has already mourned the connection mentally. Hate, at this stage, is simply the final emotional closure. What many people never understand is that Gemini doesn't hate impulsively. Their hate is the result of analysis, disappointment, and emotional exhaustion. By the time it arrives, the decision has already been made internally. There is no debate left. Once someone reaches this category, Gemini does not seek revenge. They don't need closure. They don't want explanations. They simply stop investing energy. And for Gemini, attention is everything. Removing it is the ultimate emotional verdict. If you are a Gemini listening to this, it's important to recognize that your ability to detach is not cruelty. It is self-protection. You give people chances. You try to understand. But when patterns repeat and respect disappears, walking away is an act of self-respect. And if you are someone who recognizes themselves in these behaviors, understand this. Gemini may forgive words, mistakes, and misunderstandings, but they do not forgive repeated disrespect. Once the Gemini mind categorizes someone as unsafe, untrustworthy, or emotionally draining, the door closes quietly and permanently. There is no dramatic goodbye, no explanation letter, no final argument, just silence, distance, and the unmistakable feeling that something has ended for good. Before we close, if this video resonated with you, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Content like this only reaches the right people when it's supported. And if you're a Gemini, comment below which of these behaviors you recognize the most. Your experience might help someone else understand what they lost. Because once a Gemini hates you forever, it's not out of anger. It's because mentally and emotionally, you no longer exist.